This seems like one of those singularly American, what began as a feel-good story. Obviously, people heard you talk. They know you're not from here. How did you come across this story?
Someone brought it into a producer brought it into the production company I was working at. The company's called Raw. They made a theatrical doc a few years back called The Imposter, and they've got a film out at the moment called American Animals. And I guess a lot of my career has been spent in development, in ideas, and you get quite cynical and quite jaded quite quickly. You feel you've seen every idea there is to be made. And when this one came in there, instantly this is the single greatest story I've ever come across, and it works on a kind of human level. There's a compelling human story at its heart, but it also has these much bigger themes of free will, destiny, family. And I instantly I was like, I have to make this film. 5 years later, we're here.
What took 5 years?
4 years of that was a combination of raising funding, which took longer than you might think, especially in the UK, to get that side of it. But also mainly winning the trust of the brothers. I mean, when you see the film, you understand why they might find it hard to trust people, and it just took a long time to build that trust. I think twofold: one, because of obviously what had happened to them, but also when they were famous in the 80s, a lot of people promised them stuff. A lot of media people promised them stuff. So that never materialized. They were very cynical about us.
You ended up directing, but you were originally the producer. What happened to your director? Or
Well, I was originally the development producer, and at the start, all kinds of all the biggest names in documentary were being sort of touted about as director, and I just sort of quietly kept on ingratiating myself with the story and the contributors till it got to the point that they couldn't really get rid of me. But I was very lucky. The production company and CNN Films in particular took a chance on me.
was it fully fledged when it came to you, all the knowledge about the Louise Wise Center, about Dr. Neubauer, or did this open up as you began working on it?
No, absolutely not. I mean, we had about 50 or 60% of the backstory, I think, that we kind of knew, but it exists in this kind of pre-internet era where we're fortunate that most of the people are still alive, or a lot of them are, to talk about it, but it wasn't something you could easily research on the internet. I mean, my producer sat in Jewish archives in New York for months on end, and we went and met people, and like Natasha, Neubauer's assistant, I don't think she's ever spoken on camera before. So there was a lot of sort of old-fashioned journalism went into it.
And as far as digging into the story itself, did the brothers have a clue about how big the story was? They knew their own piece of it, but did you bring a bigger picture to them?
Yeah, I mean, they dug away at it for a bit, and then I thought they'd been knocked back so many times and had so many, approached so many lawyers about the case who told them they couldn't take it on because of statute of limitations or because of conflict of interest, involvement with some of the players in the Jewish Board of Family and Children's Services or the Louise Wise agency, that they'd sort of given up. And I think the real revelation for them was that it was about parenting. I mean, we're pretty sure as you can be, that was a particular focus of the study. I think they're at the point now where nothing will surprise them if you've lived the life they have, and essentially they've lived the kind of Truman Show almost like existence at the start of their lives. I don't think anything really shocks them anymore, but it makes them angry, definitely.
When it came to structure for a documentarian, you have to have enough material to tell the whole story. Sometimes there are narrative gaps. Did you run into any of those, and did you think, oh my God, this is going to derail what we're doing?
This is really unusual for a documentary, I'd say, in that a lot of documentaries I watch, feature docs, I think there isn't quite enough material to sustain 90 minutes, and we had a surplus of material for this, and actually there was pressure put on us to make it into a mini series or something like that. But I'd always aspired to make it as a theatrical doc. There are definitely visual gaps, and that's why we ended up using the reconstruction at the start of the film. Initially, we didn't want to at all, but what I realised as we were making it is that those early scenes are really important in terms of aligning the audience with the boys. You want to be discovering things as they discovered it, and that inciting incident, to use a sort of screenwriting term, of the Bobby going to college for the first time and big mistake, everything else stems from that. All our knowledge about the study, I think if he hadn't gone to that college, we might still be sitting here knowing absolutely nothing about the study, and the boys could be living separate lives. Eddie might even still be alive for all I know, so it was really important to dramatise those opening parts.
I thought that your decision to shoot the surviving triplets separately was a creative decision of yours. Was it just that they wouldn't sit on camera together?
No, it was a creative decision, but they weren't speaking. I mean, their relationship was very, very fractured. And actually, the first time we got them together was that where you see them sit down. I mean, that's all genuine, that kind of sort of awkwardness. And the weird thing about that interview is they turned up wearing the same shoes, exactly the same shoes, and they hadn't spoken for like 8 months previously. So I thought they were like sort of messing with me, but they genuinely did. And so there are these weird twin triplet things that happen when you're filming that you couldn't predict.
Does Go Dark is almost that Hitchcockian shocker, because you're watching it and you think Louise Wise, Jewish Adoption Center, Nazis, and you gasp. You can't help that. But when you've screened it for people, when you've shown it to people, is that for them the turning point? And did you mean that to be the turning point for this doc?
I think we wanted that to be the turning point of revelation in terms of the sort of Nazi connection. I mean, I'm not Jewish. My wife's Jewish. She finds it really, really uncomfortable watching this film. She finds it really difficult because there's a sort of, for her, it's like Jewish people don't do this kind of thing to other Jewish people, especially because of the legacy of the Holocaust and Mengele. And so I wanted it to be in there, but I didn't want to labour it too heavily. I wanted it to feel like a universal story. But it's absolutely a central irony of this story that David's family fled Austria because of the Holocaust, and Peter Neubauer's family fled Austria because of the Holocaust, and they ended up on either side of this experiment.
It was so interesting to hear the very cheerful tone of the researcher, the woman who worked with Dr. Neubauer, the sense that, well, this is what we did. This was science. You know, how can you turn down science? And almost being abstract about it.
I mean, Natasha is one of the most extraordinary people that I've ever interviewed in my life. I mean, actually, the two older women in this film, for me, are at the heart of it. You know, Natasha, who's the researcher who worked with Neubauer, and then David's aunt, Hedy, who's kind of like, for me, the moral centre of the film. And they both had very different things to say. I think Natasha, in her defence, it was a different time, and there were a lot of experiments done in the 50s and 60s when psychology was trying to establish itself as a kind of science. It was, Lawrence calls it the Wild West of psychology, and things like the Milgram obedience experiments and later the Stanford prison experiments, you would never be able to get those past the psychology ethics committee
involve
today.
physical pain, among other things.
Exactly. You would never be able to do them. But I do think that the time, and also the two people who speak in the film, they're peripheral, very peripheral to the study. Whereas we know of psychiatrists who are in New York practicing today who are heavily involved in setting it up and are quoted in, you know, they're mentioned in all the meetings in the notes that we've got. And we contacted them. They said, well, I don't know what you're talking about. Not me.
How did this film change you?
That is a really good question. It changed me. It changed me in the sense that, well, I had a son while I was making this film, and suddenly all this debate about nature nurture became very personal. You know, and when he was born with a personality, and I don't think I'd ever realised quite just how strongly that genetic imprint is there from the start. So that was pretty shocking. But it's made me think a lot about ethics and filmmaking, actually, because there are parallels with scientific experimentation. You have a huge amount of power as a filmmaker, and how you wield that power is really important. And it's easy to lose track of that in pursuit of a great story, just as I would argue that these people did in pursuit of a great experiment.
Because what we don't see is how you got people to agree to be on camera, what concessions you had to make, what trade-offs you had to make. So that's really what you're talking about. When you read a scientific study, they're supposed to tell you how they arrived at those conclusions. But with filmmaking, the same thing. You don't see how the film comes together. You just see the film.
I think it's more also that people tell you stuff that you could use in the film. And, you know, sometimes you do, that maybe, you know, will hurt them or upset them. You have to be constantly aware of the position of power you're in and be ethical in your use of the information. People will tell you all kinds of things when you put a camera on them, particularly if people haven't been through like therapy or anything like that in their lives. They use you as a therapist, and you're suddenly in a position where you can ask them anything, and pretty much they'll answer if you have that kind of connection with them. So you just have to be really mindful, I think, that you don't abuse that in pursuit of your goal, which is to make a really powerful, moving film.
Tim Wardle, thank you so much for delivering this film.
Thank you
and for being here today.